And we are live.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for our happy hour interview series. Before we begin and before I introduce our guest, I have a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, our Reed Quintet Miniatures series. The deadline for submissions for that is on July 1st at 11:59 p.m. For more information and for guidelines and specifications, you can go to our website, civitasolisquintet.com, and you can go under the projects tab to see that. We are really excited. We've gotten a couple of submissions so far, and we're looking forward to premiering your works online. Second housekeeping item, if you have just been tuning into our interview series recently, and you want to check out some of our old videos or see what's coming up next, you can do that in two ways. You can, first of all, check out our Facebook page, and you can just go to Civitasolis Quintet on Facebook, and that should pull that up. And you can also go to our website under the same projects tab and go to the happy hour section. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest. Dr. Justin Benavidez is the Assistant Professor of Tuba and Euphonium at the Florida State University College of Music in Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, Dr. Benavidez.
Hello there. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to have you. And let's just go ahead and get started. So let's start off with just a little bit of background information about your career. So what first got you interested in pursuing music professionally, and what's kind of led you to where you are at FSU today?
Sure. Well, that's kind of a long-winded question for me to answer, but I think when I was a student pursuing a degree as an undergrad, I was like most students today, where our main goal is to enjoy what we do and seek avenues that we can succeed professionally in that way. So when I was an undergrad as a performance major at University of North Texas, I was primarily looking at being a professional musician, performing musician. But as I went through that degree, by about my junior year, I started teaching a lot of high school lessons, a lot of middle school lessons, as a way to make some money to pay some bills. And I started to realize how much I enjoyed that. As I spoke to my mentors and my advisors, I realized that there was a possibility to continue with my education and potentially be a college teacher. And, that was something that I pursued even more so in my master's degree and my doctoral degree. And, as my career started to take off, I was one of those people that did really well at school, did everything that I could to make connections and to prepare myself for what I thought was the right preparation for a degree or a career in teaching music. But, I think that what I realized was that it wasn't easy. It was a very difficult path. And I was one of those people that I finished my doctoral degree and I had no job waiting for me. And for a year, I sort of freelanced and I played in about 6 or 7 regional orchestras and continued teaching on the side. And then, through some lucky breaks, some good timing, having the right recommendations, being ready professionally in the right spot to take advantage of an opportunity, I started my career, moved down to Texas for my first position, stayed there for about 4 years. Knew that what I really wanted to do was be a part of a large music program, to teach a large studio, comprehensive studio, from obviously undergrad, but through doctoral students, and worked my way through the professional ladder, and I'm lucky to be now at Florida State.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on that question, so obviously you've had, a really multifaceted career with performance and teaching. So I have like a two-part question for you. First, do you have any tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career like yours with teaching and performing and, chamber music, recording, all that other fun stuff? And then do you have anything that you wish you knew before you got your career started, maybe at the end of your doctorate or something like that?
Yeah, of course. It's funny because I often have students that come to get lessons with me. I had one actually early this afternoon with a prospective graduate student. And I always ask my students or prospective students, well, what is it that you want to do? And by and large, for my field, there just aren't that many opportunities. As we all know, the music field is very competitive, but for tuba specifically, there are about 30 to 40 median to above median paying orchestra jobs, each with one tuba in the orchestra, right? And there are a few academic teaching positions, but those aren't always as fulfilling or as well paying as we would hope. So for this particular student that met me today, he told me he wanted to play in an orchestra and he wanted to teach at the college level. And of course, that's sort of like the top level of what we can do as a tuba player in the music field. And I told him, which I tell all prospective students, because I want them to come into the situation with eyes wide open, what work that really requires. Particularly on the academic side, you're looking at 2 graduate degrees, at least 5 years of graduate coursework. You're looking at potentially doctoral treatise, doctoral dissertation. You're looking at being willing to take a job at any level, whether that's adjunct or lecture, being willing to travel anywhere, not confining yourself to one region of the country. I know that I had to do that. I've moved across country about 3 times in my short career thus far, but being willing to take any opportunity that is available to you, and then knowing full well that once you get that first opportunity, the rise to where you may want to be, or even to a tenure track position, or even just to tenure, requires continued work thereafter. So I tell these prospective students from the day one of your degree, you're looking at about another 10 years of work. And if you're willing to look at it that way and really to enjoy that journey, then not only will you grow, but you'll set yourself up and you'll put yourself in position to be the person at one of those top tier jobs. Now, on the orchestral side, that's in my opinion even a dicier game. Of course, you're waiting on people to retire so that there are openings. And in the tuba world, we're incredibly lucky. This year, I believe there were 3 openings. A monumental year for tuba is 3 orchestra auditions in a year, right? And so it requires a lot of sacrifice. It requires a lot of dedication, not only on audition time spent getting lessons with prospective professionals that do what you'd like to do, but also the work and the energy and the money that it requires to take these auditions, taking 2 tubas on a plane or driving cross country, taking these auditions where 80 tuba players show up for one job. And I'm sure all of you have taken auditions as well, and you know what the rigor of that sort of path requires. But for these students that I have that come to see me and give me their lofty goals as well as they should be lofty, I try to be very real with them about the dedication and the grit that it's going to take to get to those levels.
Thank you, Dr. Benavidez. So moving on to the next question, you have had some really fantastic teachers throughout your career. What are some of the major lessons each of them have left you with?
Sure. Yeah, I've been really blessed, to study with the people that I have studied with. I'd like to say that a lot of that is dumb luck. I didn't really know a lot about my teachers before I studied with them. When I was a high school student, I started playing the tuba late middle school, and I didn't have a teacher. I had a band director. In Texas, most band directors, I should say most programs, have a woodwind director, a brass director, a percussion director. And my brass band director was a trumpet player. So, he would give me a lesson here and there, but I didn't ever study with the tuba player. And this is growing up in San Antonio, Texas. And so I went to college. I auditioned at one school that was North Texas because I knew it was one of the strong studios and strong college programs for music. And my very first formal lesson with the tuba player was my freshman year, week 1. So I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. I had a certain amount of intelligence about playing music, but it was very dumb luck that I actually studied with Don Little, who teaches at the University of North Texas and one of the really renowned pedagogues for tuba and euphonium. He studied with Arnold Jacobs when he was doing his graduate work. And so I actually had a lot of in-depth knowledge about the concept of song and wind, which is a very popular pedagogy for tuba and euphonium, and really for all brass. And what I learned from him specifically was how to be very simple about our approach. What I didn't realize then that I now realize 20 years later as a college teacher, is that oftentimes the most simple way to say things is the most effective. And particularly with young students, it's very easy to sort of crowd their mind and to give them too much information. As teachers, we want to give our students all the information that will make them succeed. But sometimes the way that we need to disseminate that information is really important as well. And he was so great at that. He knew just the right words to say and the way to say them to elicit a change. And, moreover, he was a really fine tuba player. He played in the Fort Worth Symphony. He had played as a substitute tubist in the Chicago Symphony, St. Louis Symphony. So he knew how to play the tuba really well, and he would play with me often in lessons. And that sort of hearing that sound, I knew that I was getting better when I was getting close to approximating that sound. So those were some of the really foundational concepts that I had from him. In my master's degree, I studied with Fritz Kenzig. Fritz Kenzig is another master teacher. And I knew the University of Michigan was a really good music school, really good school in general. And what I knew initially about it were the students that were coming out of that studio. As I was looking at where to do my graduate work, I sort of took a lay of the land to see what is happening out there. Where are people getting good jobs? Where are the people that are winning competitions? And it turned out it was a great fit for me. He just retired this year, and there's a book of stories that is being compiled for him. And I had the opportunity to write a short story about our first lesson. And it just reminded me of his incessant standard. There's a sonata for flute that is arranged for tuba, and the opening two notes are an ascending sixth interval. And when I met him, we had, of course, the pleasantries, and we sat down and I told him about myself. He said, okay, well, let's go ahead and start playing. We must have played those two notes for about a half an hour. And I just knew right then that he was not going to accept anything less than what he wanted me to sound like. And, that sort of unending standard is something that I absolutely carry from him. Moreover, he had this enthusiasm for teaching, always gregarious, always in a good mood, made you feel very comfortable around him. And what I learned from that was how to manage a studio that is inclusive, that is a safe space for all students, but that also makes everyone feel like they've bought into what the success of the group is. And that's really what we had there. I liked it so much that I continued on for my doctoral studies at the same institution with the same teacher, Fritz Kenzig. And then after I had completed my doctorate, as I mentioned before, I didn't have a job, and I was looking around and trying to piece my income together. And I knew that I still needed to pursue some form of learning. I knew that I didn't have everything that I needed across all my instruments and across all my pedagogy. And so I started attending the Aspen Music Festival. And I studied with Warren Deck, who played in the New York Philharmonic for 20 years. And, from Warren, I really learned primarily how to play in an ensemble. In that music festival, it's 8 or 9 weeks long. Every week is a major orchestral program. And he would come to every single concert for every single student, and he would give you details about what you sounded like, what you could have done better, what went really well, directly after every concert. And so I learned about how to play in an ensemble with detailed feedback directly after. I learned about how fun it can be to listen to other parts, how for so long I had been focused on myself in an ensemble, and how we can take the skills that we learn in the practice room or in the applied lesson and how to apply that into ensemble playing. So, for me, that was very eye-opening. It made me sort of feel like I was less on an island around other musicians, and like I was more connected, and it made ensemble playing a heck of a lot more fun too.
I have a follow-up question to that. When you were talking about the high standard that your teachers taught you, that you bring to your students, how do you balance that with, any sort of negative perfectionism that may come, so that your students remain having a positive mindset, but still like a very high standard?
Well, you've asked the key question, right? And I think that it's important as an educator to find that balance, because we all know that not every student learns the same way. And so for some students, you can, ride them really hard, for lack of a better way of saying it, and enforce a standard. And if there is improvement, so I'll take a step back. As a teacher, I'm always constantly asking myself, is this in the best interest of the student? Is the student actually improving through this method? And it's important as a teacher to know various pedagogical avenues to get to that destination. So If, for example, a high standard isn't being met with sheer repetition, then there are other avenues to get to that high standard. It might be giving the student an example on your own instrument. It might be detailing the concept in a visual or graphic means. It might be using kinetic motion, something that I do often in my studios. We talk about the pressure of the air inside the tuba when we buzz the mouthpiece. So I'll blow on their palm and ask them to recreate it, then buzz it on their mouthpiece and recreate the sensation of the air. But what I'm alluding to is the ability to take the temperature of the room and be willing to go in different directions. I think that the concept of having a high standard is a great one, but you're right. And if with a lack of balance, in some ways, we can get to the direction of that standard in a negative way. And perfectionism is a real thing. I've seen students that are arrested in their development because they are pursuing that perfection. But we all know a perfect concert is not necessarily a moving concert. Perfect recital is not a moving recital, right? We live in the moment. We try to communicate. And just as we speak, I mispronounce words all the time. Ask my spouse. You know, we can make mistakes and still have a wonderful musical journey and a musical expression. And so I think that's important to keep in balance when we are trying to pursue excellence in our craft.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry, I actually have a follow-up as well, but
Sure.
So when you were talking about your experiences at the University of Michigan, you were talking about the studio culture and how the standards there were so high and that everyone kind of held similar standards. How do you think, as a teacher coming into a new studio, that you can help develop that kind of culture?
Well, that's something that I'm well versed in, having had many different jobs. You know, I think that primarily what I have done in the past is I've thought about what are the good aspects of a studio that are already in place and honoring those particular characteristics. You know, it might be that the students are earnest in general in their approach. It might be that there's great studio camaraderie. It might be that they're very disciplined because they have regular fundamentals classes every single day. But whatever it is, I in the past have tried to honor what has been good about a studio before I've tried to change anything. Then beyond that, you know, creating sort of the camaraderie and what I speak to of the safe space of a studio. I always found that when I was in a studio or when I was leading a studio where everybody felt like they were going towards the same goals or towards the same path, I always found that sort of group herd mentality had more momentum than when the students maybe lacked motivation, but you had a few students that were after higher goals, right? So, you know, what I've found that works for me is do a sort of an open studio class where everyone has an equal say, taking comments from all students, allowing everyone to have a voice, so that it's group learning. We want to create a safe space for group learning, of course. I try to do extracurricular, I would call them, events, small ensemble, chamber ensemble recitals, solo studio recital night, things like that that are not necessarily based in grades, but that are primarily based in, maybe for lack of a better word, in fun. You know, things that remind us that we do enjoy playing our instruments, and these are the ways that we express that. You know, I think that it's a really tricky thing that only gets better as you have more experience. And unfortunately, there really isn't a class, right, that pertains to those particular ideas. So maybe I would just say a lot of it is trial and error. But I've also found that having a really great, positive, enthusiastic outlook on things helps too. If I'm in my office and I'm practicing doing my fundamentals an hour and a half a day, and all of my lessons, all my students in their lessons feel like my time has been invested in them, then I've generally found that those students reciprocate. And it sort of cycles upward that way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So we've seen some of your videos of your performances with the faculty brass quintet at Round Top.
Mm-hmm.
We were wondering, what was that experience like? And do you have any advice for players who are interested in a professional chamber music career?
Yeah, so those were some really fun times. I really enjoyed, we've done a few programs there at Round Top Music Festival where I teach in the summer. I'd like to say that I remember one that was really stressful. It was the very first one that we did. They have not always had, they've always had a chamber program there at that festival. Every Saturday afternoon, the faculty presents an hour to an hour and a half long chamber performance of mixed instrumentation, mixed groups. But they had never had a brass group until I was working there. And so I was a part of the very first brass chamber concert. And there was a lot of pressure because there was sort of an expectation of how good this should come across, right? And the validity of the brass. This is probably not something that you have heard before. I'm probably your first brass person on your series here, but the validity of brass chamber music when you contrast that with string chamber music, for example, at a string festival. So there was a lot of pressure and there was a lot of stress, and we put about a week of rehearsals into that, really challenging repertoire, and it was wonderful. You know, it was not perfect, but it was a real joy, and it was a lot of musical expression and energy. Oh, the energy! So the faculty quintet sort of rotates. We don't always have the exact same faculty members at the exact same time at that festival. I'm typically there the first 2 or 3 weeks. And I do remember that first group. We had Micah Wilkinson, who plays principal trumpet in the Pittsburgh Symphony, John Kitzman, who played, he's recently retired, but he played principal trombone for 40 plus years in the Dallas Symphony, Eric Reed, who he plays horn in the American Brass Quintet, myself, the nobody, and then we had a student on the second trumpet part. So we're talking about a wide range of experience and a wide range of even talent. And so it was a lesson in constant musical communication, you know, and there's another situation where we talk about high standards. Well, everybody wanted it to be really, really great, but we had to figure out a way to work with each other's sounds, even as simple as intonation. Different people have differing intonations depending on the groups that they play and the literature that they play. So we came to a really great understanding. And at the end of that week, we had a beautiful product. They record all the concerts and they regularly submit them to NPR. Well, I guess it's APR now, but the precursor to a Performance Today. And so, you know, that I'm happy to think that one of those pieces that we played on that concert, I think, has been featured on Performance Today about 10 times now. And so it's one of those things where that memory comes up every so often, and it's a lot of fun. Now, I'm going off on a tangent. You asked me about advice, right, for students that want to pursue chamber music. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of things, you know, I don't consider myself a professional chamber musician, but I do consider myself sort of a highlighter of what chamber music can do for musicians. I firmly think that the practice room and the applied lesson is where we learn to play our instrument. I think the large ensemble is where we learn to follow and where we kind of learn to play as a group. But it's really chamber music where we learn to communicate with each other as musicians, where we have an ownership of your own part, of course, but you have an equal say across the small ensemble. So, you know, I would advise students that want to pursue chamber music, particularly on brass instruments, but really on any instrument, is to dive head first. And that means be active in the undergrad level, be active outside of the curriculum, outside of your requirements, form your own groups, play at various venues. In my studio, we try to promote Tuba Euphonium Ensemble, and I have everyone do a service project. And often people will go to assisted living centers or to the hospital or go to a local elementary school and do a concert, but just force yourself to perform. I think it's incredibly important to listen to a lot of chamber music. In my field, American Brass Quintet, Canadian Brass Quintet, Empire Brass, these are all groups that are sort of the pillars of what it means to be a chamber ensemble. Yeah, I've been a part of a few non-professional groups in the past, and it is always fun. And I just think dive head first and be curious, learn with a passion.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Along those same lines, do you have any tips for someone who's on a university interview process and they have to play with something like a faculty wind quintet or faculty brass quintet, and you know, they're being watched as they interact and play with the faculty members that are already at that university.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another stressful sort of situation, right? I've only had to do that once, actually. And as it goes, I was offered the job and then I turned it down. I didn't take the job after all, but I did have to do a quintet as part of an interview. And what I would suggest for that is what I tell all students essentially, but you need to know your part before you play a note in the rehearsal. What does that mean? That means that you're listening to the piece ahead of time, but you're listening to it with a score and not with your own part. You're not looking at your own part. You're learning everybody else's part, of course. I think that those are hard things to do without a lot of experience. So to piggyback off of what I said before, just being active in that field so that you don't expect to turn that switch on and be good at something that you have not actually done much of. I think that the skill of being able to play one thing on your instrument while you're listening to others around you is what actually defines really good musicians, which is why I say that chamber music is where we have the most opportunity to do that. In my particular interview, we did one piece that had no recording. I had never heard of it before. And that was something that I broke down and I learned half tempo. And then I brought it back up to full speed. And in the moment, because there was no recording for this piece, it was a handwritten piece, something that particular quintet had been playing for years. That was the situation where they knew exactly what they wanted to do with it, and it was my job to be the new guy on the block and follow. And so there's a time to follow. We did another piece on that same interview that was a very, very standard. It's the Bach, My Spirit Be Joyful. Brass quintets played for Easter service every single year. And it has this very ornate tuba part with 16th notes. And it's all technique. And there's a particular piece where I had to be the leader, as I had the most rhythmically active part. And in that piece, there's a DS, and that's not always taken. And they had decided that they were going to take the DS, and they said it to me ahead of time. And in the moment, I forgot. And so I played the wrong part, and I stopped playing, and they just kept going. And it took me about 2-3 seconds to jump back in. And I said at the end, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I missed that. I just forgot." And they looked at me and said, "Oh, it's fine. You knew exactly where you were. You jumped back in." So, there's an example of making a really dumb rookie mistake, but knowing the piece well enough that I knew where they were, and I was able to fit back into the ensemble seamlessly.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, switching gears just a little bit here, we've enjoyed listening to your album Emblems. But could you describe your personal experience and what that was like working on the album, both logistically and musically?
Sure. So, that's the first album I've done. I'm right now working on a second, but that was my very first experience, and it was so eye-opening. What I realized is that there are certain things that you have to be focused on in a recording that, how to put this? You have to be specific about certain things, but relieve your ears from hearing others. For example, in a recording session, it's incredibly important that you play in tune. It's not nearly as important that you play in balance, particularly if you have something mic'd where every instrument is mic'd. That's something you can fix in post-production. But intonation is just something, intonation and obviously ensemble are things that you just cannot fix. So, for example, the way that I was mic'd initially in the recording session for that CD was something that was not quite working. And I didn't like the way that I sounded. But that's something that you can fix. That's not the way that you sound. I think most musicians are in tune to the way that they sound primarily. The very first thing you think of when you play is, how do I sound? Do I sound good? And that doesn't really matter in a recording session because they can make you sound however you want them to make you sound. But again, intonation and ensemble are crucial. It's a little bit different to play something when edits are made, as virtually all CDs or all commercially released music has edits. The ability to lay something down the exact same way many, many times in a row so that you can use material from different takes. That was something that I did not know. And, I think one of my strengths as a player is consistency. So that kind of played to that strength. But There have been situations where I've recorded with ensemble, and you as a player might play something really, really well one time, but the ensemble didn't. You have to do it again, and you have to get your part right every time. Because if the ensemble happens to fix their issue and get it correct, but you messed your part up, well, that you're not moving ahead with that, right? So really consistency, and then attuning my ears specifically to certain attributes of that was eye-opening. Um, yeah, and through that process, I really enjoyed it. I think initially I didn't, and then when we went through the whole process, especially post-production, I really did enjoy it, and so that's leading me to another project that'll hopefully be done here in about a year.
Mhm.
You mentioned consistency, and I was wondering if you have any tips for how to achieve consistency when you're, faced with a video camera or the recording and a microphone, and how not to let the nerves get the best of you in that situation.
Yeah. So this is a really, really important conversation. I think what I often will tell my students, especially who have auditions coming up or that are going for solo competitions, there's there is a red light effect. What I mean is when the red light comes on for that camera or that recording, and you know that it counts, and you know that you have to lay it down. There's sort of this psychosis of now all of the pressure is on me. And I think there are different ways to deal with it. And there isn't one tried and true method because everybody thinks a little bit differently. For some people, it's sort of taking a bit of the stress away from the situation by devaluing it. This is just another performance. Whether I win this job or not, I'm going to practice again tomorrow. Things like that de-stress the situation. Other people just need sort of like the rote of recording and video recording to normalize that. So what I have found for my students, the ones that particularly have a lot of stress in those situations, they're avoiding recording themselves. And so they get to the point where they allow themselves to work up to that moment, and then they hit the red button, and then they try to record it, but all the pressure is on at that moment. Well, if you get used to the camera being there and it no longer takes your attention, then there's no real reason to feel the stress of it, right? So, I don't know of a perfect way to do that, but I do think that it's important to understand ourselves individually and to address that ahead of time and not waiting for the audition or the final round of that competition.
Sorry, Beth, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, go for it.
So talking about that, getting rid of the red light effect, would you advise maybe students who are recording orchestra excerpts for a competition or for festivals or for chamber groups who are recording for competitions, that type of thing, maybe even in their rehearsals or practice rooms, just always having, or not, maybe not always, but a good majority of the time kind of having a recorder going?
Well, it is good up to a point, I think. I would say, what are you going to use that recording for? Because if you're not going to go back and evaluate it, then is it really even on, right? Mm-hmm. Does a tree fall in the woods if I don't hear it? Is the recorder on if I don't go back and listen to it? I don't know. But, sort of in that way, I would say bringing different sets of ears to listen to you. So I tell my students, when you get to about 20 mock auditions, then you're about ready for the real audition. And how are you going to do 20 mock auditions? Are you going to ask your spouse to listen to all 20? Maybe. But how about having different sets of ears? And maybe not just in my case, in my studio's case, not just tuba players, having other brass instruments, having a director, asking Dr. Jimenez from FSU, hey, can you come listen to my tuba excerpts? Because you're going to have a totally different take on it than I will or my teacher will. So, I think it's important to play for people. And, when you talk to professional musicians, or I think of, friends that I have like in the Canadian brass, they talk about being on stage and losing yourself to the moment. And that there is no evaluative aspect to that. You're so comfortable in the moment that there might be 3,000 people in the room and there might be nobody in the room. And it's all still the same because you're still you and the music is the music. So I think there's a really wonderful release to that. But I don't know of a way to just create that. There is no magic recipe to it. It really is building that up over time. And I do think the camera is great, particularly if you're going to go back, it won't lie to you. But if you're actually trying to get over performative issues, then try different sets of ears, try different people, try different settings.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. That's definitely something that our group has talked about on a number of occasions. So it's really good to, get your input on that.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of jump back to our discussion on, your actual recording projects. Could you just talk a little bit about like the process you went through in terms of, just getting your first recording out? And then, do you have any tips on people who are actually kind of looking to create their own album for the first time in terms of, programming, funding, all that extra stuff that goes along with, the music?
Sure. Well, I think primarily if you're going to do any sort of recording project, it has to be of top-notch quality. And that means that your ensemble or an individual has to be able to play their instrument really well. You have to have you have to be at the level that you are going to be proud to have your work critiqued. And I think we all know what that means. It's fun, of course, but it's also out there forever, and with your name on it forever, right? So it's got to be a really high standard. Beyond that, I've been lucky in that the projects that I have done, or the one that I've done and the one that I'm currently working on, have been funded by university sources, and that's sort of it's a really nice way to get some of this creative work done. Now, if you're not particularly in that avenue, I know that there are a lot of crowd fund sourcing things that are out there now. I have some colleagues that have done projects that way. I also think it's really important to have something worth saying on a recording. And what I mean is, what is the music that you are choosing? What are you releasing into the world? So what I decided with my recording was I wanted to play concerti by American composers, and 2 of those were premieres in those forms. I wanted to release something that was new to my field that other people could listen to and maybe have some value to learning pieces on their own. I think commissioning is really important. I think making sure that having different aesthetics and different styles of music is important. We're in a particular culture and an environment right now where the movements that are out in the world have opened a lot of people's eyes about what voices are being heard and what voices are not. And I think it's really important to have a diversity of experience represented when we're making projects, so that we feel like it's something that is reflective of the world around us, right? So I think all those things are keys to think about, and probably things that you have also thought about in terms of the actual process. So after all the preparation and the rehearsals, for my 50-minute disc, we sat down in recording sessions for 2.5 days, each session being about 2.5 to 3 hours, until I couldn't really play at my level anymore. And we did, like I said before, lots of takes. We picked the best of those takes. We edited it. I would say not overly edited based on what some of the stories I've heard from other recordings, but somewhat edited. And after that, it was completely put together and mixed. And that was a really interesting process where you sit in the recording studio and you work with the recording engineer on how to mix and with my CD, it was a tuba and piano. So there's not really that much to mess with. But if we're doing a chamber music group, then there might be quite a bit that we want to fiddle with or adjust, right? And then beyond that, you have the mastering, and then you have post-production where you have the manufacturer, and that's where you find a label. I think that nowadays with the digital realm, a bit of advice that I might offer is to actually look into digital avenues, digital platforms where you can release the music yourself. I actually went through a traditional distributor, Mark Records, and that was fantastic. I had a really great experience with them. But physical copies of music are really not in vogue anymore. So I have in my office about 200 CDs sitting in a box that who knows if they will ever get out into the world, right? So I think it's important to look at the digital platforms as well, if not exclusively, just because that seems to be the way that people are consuming music more nowadays than the CD player. I mean, let me ask you, does anybody here have a CD player outside of your car? Right? And laptops, computers don't have CD players anymore. So It's sort of
I
a dead
used to.
medium. Yeah, it is. There is something nice about holding that album in your hand, but I'm sure you can just get a special pressing of it if you want to have a physical copy. So I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully.
Yeah, definitely good advice. Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Benavides, you have had many wonderful successes in competitions as well as in the orchestral circuit, such as Falconi Festival. You also won the Aspen Music Festival Concerto competition, and you play for Tallahassee Symphony. What do you think has led to your success, and how do you prepare for auditions?
Wow, that's a big question to answer. I think that not all opportunities are necessarily arrived at by only the skill on your instrument. I think it's really important to be a good person, to make connections with people, to be a citizen of our musical community in a way that makes other people want to work with you. I guess maybe now I'm speaking even more to like beyond the audition of how you keep a job, right, and how you become a valuable member of a musical organization. But I feel like a lot of people forget that, and I feel like there's so much amount of dedication and focus on how to get yourself better to put yourself in those positions that I think there's a little bit of lack of focus on the ability to work with others and to keep those positions. So, I try to make my students know that before we dig headfirst into how do I win an audition. But as it pertains to that specifically, I think whenever you're competing against others, particularly when it's the exact same material being played, I think that there's for me the way that I teach is that there are two key aspects to look at. First, how well are you saying what you say? That's the craftsmanship of your instrument. So, to be a little bit of a nerd now on tuba, it would be, what sound am I making? What's the efficiency of my buzz? Do I have consistency of my fronts of my notes? How am I releasing all of my notes? What sort of phrases am I making? What is my dynamic palette? It's a lot of questions and it's a lot of detail and refining what you're trying to say. Well, hopefully you have a good teacher that tells you what you should sound like. Hopefully you have a key on recordings so that you know what you're trying to strive for within the larger ensemble for auditions. But then most of the work comes back down to the individual doing the work. So there is what I advise my students, and what I do myself or have done myself is start everything at half tempo. We start everything at exactly 50% so that we can hear all of the detail that goes into, I don't know if you can hear my daughter yelling in the background, so that you can hear all of the detail of what needs to go into that excerpt or that particular passage of the solo, and that you know exactly what you're trying to do. So we're not necessarily only talking about intonation and rhythm. We're talking about style. We're talking about articulation. We're talking about various details that make it sound good. And maybe that's the key question: what makes something sound good, right? Then beyond that, we move the tempo up slowly over the course of several weeks, maybe a week at 50%, a week at 60, a week at 70. You definitely heard that one, I think, right? But as you're working the tempo up, you have to strive to retain all of that quality. We've talked a couple of times now about high standard. Can you maintain that standard as it becomes more difficult because the tempo is moved faster? Not only because of the technique that is required as the tempo moves faster, but because you have less time to think about all those elements in the moment. And so there is a little bit of a science to it. But where's the art? Okay, so that's one avenue. Here's the second avenue, the art. What am I trying to say? What is the final product going to sound like? Is it worth listening to? Am I compelling with what I am trying to say? And particularly for tuba, I find that most of my students focus on the former rather than the latter, because what I call the objective versus the subjective, your time is either good or bad. Your intonation is either correct or incorrect, right? So it's objective. But the subjective, well, I can make a phrase in a variety of ways. What makes one more compelling than the other? And this is really key because it's a little bit different to all of us. And it's actually what makes music an art, and what makes music cool is that it's not the exact same, for me, the exact same Prokofiev 5 Symphony Number 5 first movement excerpt for every tuba player, right? It's a little bit different for everybody. It's an interpretive process. But there is some of the science to it, and there is some of the art to it. And I think that having a really great teacher, having access to great recordings, having an open ear to hearing all the detail, those would be what I would call the 3 pillars.
Thank you so much.
I know I'm definitely, oh, sorry, Luis. I know I'm definitely guilty of finding comfort in the science side of things compared to the art side of it. So that was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Switching gears a little bit to your teaching career, how do you balance your work as a teacher with your other solo, chamber, and orchestral pursuits?
Well, I think it's actually really quite easy. What I have found for myself is that I am a musician that requires a diet of different areas. I love chamber playing. I get probably not enough of that. That's probably the only area of my career, of my professional career, that I find lacking. But I love chamber music. Orchestral playing is cool in its own way, and I've been really lucky to have opportunities like that here in Tallahassee and some other places. Solo playing is fun because it challenges me in ways that no other kind of playing really can. Beyond just being the driving force of the music, the technique and the range that's required for solo tuba playing is really fun. Plus, it's always cool to get in a room with people that think they know what the tuba can do and show them a little bit more, right? That's always really cool. And then teaching. So, where we started, I said, I was an undergrad and I started teaching high school students, middle school students. I went and did my graduate studies and I taught a little bit at the college level. I realized that was an avenue of music that I felt I was making the most impact. I sometimes would wonder at the end of a concert, walking to my car, is that person who's getting in their car over there, do they remember the tuba part to Mahler 2? Maybe, but maybe they don't. Did I really cause a change in the world outside of the 90 minutes of the concert? I don't know. And it's a beautiful 90 minutes, don't get me wrong, I love it. But the longer lasting effect, I think, is the student, right? The connection that you make with the student over several years, the difference in their life that you make as they pursue their goals, seeing the light bulb moment when a concept is understood and can be applied. There's just something really rewarding and fulfilling to that sort of gets me going in a way that the other stuff can't. But like I said, what I realized about myself is that I need a little bit of it all. And maybe that sounds really selfish, but it's what makes me happy. And so I'm extremely lucky to be able to do a little bit of all of that. But balance is key, because I think for some people, it feels like it's too much. I can't do all of that, and something has to be given up to pursue something else. And, to each their own, but I would say the way to find the balance primarily is to ask yourself, well, what really does get me going? And if you don't know that, then you probably haven't asked that question of yourself. And if you have asked it and you know it, then you have direction. And then everything else is really quite simple.
I was wondering what your goals were when giving master classes at other schools for students that aren't necessarily your students. What do you find most effective and memorable for them, both them and the audience, when you go give a master class?
Well, master classes are awesome because it's the lesson. It's what I just said about teaching, except it's on a bigger stage, and you get to impact even more people, assuming that you have sort of the right approach to it. I think number one, it's always eliciting a change. What I've found as I've taught, my job is less teaching somebody how to play really well, and it's more teaching somebody how to listen really well. Because if you can get somebody to hear something a particular way, then they're going to be their own teacher. So in a master class, that's typically what I'm trying to get a student to do. And what I always found in the great master classes that I attended, or the master classes that I felt like I absorbed the most from, were the teachers that extrapolated that idea and applied it in a general sense to the audience at large. So if there was a particular situation where a student is having a difficulty with low register, I might try musical means, or I might try particularly specific craftsmanship means to get a student to do something that relates to more successful low register. It might be air, it might be embouchure, it could be a lot of things, but taking that idea to the point where the student can make that change within a few minutes is always very cool, especially when the student can control that. And then sending that message out to the audience, addressing the audience and telling them, did you see, what do you hear? Did you hear that? What is the change? Give the feedback to the student. And, you know, it's a little bit performative, but it's like classroom teaching. You know, you can't just read off the prompter and expect everyone to be involved. You've really got to come alive. And that's what I found, you know, the master classes, the successful ones that I've given have always had an element of the audience being engaged and everybody being there sort of on equal footing, which is, you know, I'm sure all of you have had the same sort of experience, right? Where you've gone to either a studio class or a master class, and it's just so riveting because one person might be in the hot seat, but everybody's getting something from it. And I think it's like a concert. It just happens to be teaching.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, Laura.
No worries.
So we have a couple of just very much open-ended final questions. So one of them was, do you have any musical experiences that stand out as being like your highlight reel, or like what's your favorite musical memory just been so far?
Well, you know, things that jump right off the bat. I said Prokofiev Symphony No. 5 earlier. I'm sure most of you know that piece, but there's a really great tuba part to that, and not to be too much of a meathead, but the tuba doesn't get to play the melody all the time, you know, and that piece you do. And so I had an opportunity to play that in Syracuse a few years back with this fabulous conductor, and that was a lot of fun. We had a couple of performances of that. I do remember a distinct concert in Aspen. So I was a student there for 6 years, and you know, like I said, it was a transformative experience for me and for ensemble, for orchestral playing. I wouldn't be the player I am today without that. But we got to play Alpine Symphony in the mountains, which, if you know anything about trying to breathe in the mountains, especially for tuba, it's insanely hard. And it was Leonard Slatkin's last performance at Aspen. And so it was just this really riveting thing for him, for the festival, for the people on stage, and it's such a beautiful piece. If you know, the last 10 minutes of that piece are glorious. And so to do that, you know, that will stay with me forever. But then on the other side, like I've had wonderful experiences going and teaching abroad. There was a couple years ago, I went to France and to Switzerland. I got to teach some of the students from the Paris Conservatory. And that was phenomenal, just to hear people have a different interpretation on tuba playing, and how, you know, I gave a recital and every student's fingering along in the audience with me from memory. And it's just like, wow, this is incredible, the level of dedication and standard that is there. And so, you know, getting to play and teach, I think I'm kind of the person that would probably find joy in almost anything, I hope. But those are ones that stand out.
Thank you. So the last question is, if there were one thing that you could change about how some people typically perceive the tuba, what would it be?
Yeah, this is kind of something that comes up pretty often for tuba, right? I mean, I kind of already alluded to it, which is, you know, we can play melodically. That's sort of the thing that, I don't know if you know what Tubby the Tuba is, if you've ever heard of that, but it's sort of like a children's story where the tuba is the star of the show. But regardless, I think that it's not really up to me to change or to expect anyone's opinion to be different than the tuba. I look at it the other way. I think it's like every tuba player's job to make people understand through their playing, make people understand that tuba players can play melodically. We can play with agility. We can play with flexibility and technique. No, for a long time, the parts haven't written tuba that way, but gosh, in the last 30 years, where the tuba is now compared to where it was 50 or 60 years ago would shock your ears. You know, professionals from the 1960s, that a good incoming college freshman sounds like professionals from 60 years ago. And I think part of that is because the tuba is the baby of the orchestra. And so it just has room to grow, right? But yeah, I would love to see more melodic use of the tuba primarily.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking time to answer all of these main questions.
Sure.
We're going to jump now into what we call our lightning round.
Can't wait.
Oh, it's going to be great. So for listeners who aren't fully aware of what that means, Lara is going to pull up a timer for us. It's going to count down from 1 minute, and we're just going to kind of go back and forth asking really quick questions. Some of them are goofy, some of them are serious, but hopefully they'll all be a good time. So give me 1 second, and there we go, got my stuff. So are you ready to go with the lightning?
I am ready. Let's see how many we can get through.
All right, Lara, you ready to start?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right, favorite childhood cartoon?
Ren and Stimpy.
Awesome. Least favorite tuba excerpt?
Mahler 1.
In your opinion, what is the worst movie of all time?
Oh my gosh. Can I pass?
No, you can't.
I can't pass. All I'm thinking of are like really good movies. Beetlejuice.
There you go. Great. Most memorable moment playing the sousaphone?
Oh, I played in the New Orleans Bowl in undergrad, freshman in college.
Awesome. Which team will win the next Super Bowl?
Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I didn't say Cowboys. Favorite euphonium piece?
Horowitz Concerto.
What was your first car?
A Jeep Cherokee.
All right. There we go. And that's the end of our lightning round.
There you go. Did I win? What do I win?
You win the benefit of knowing that you did it.
Great. Awesome.
No, but thank you so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed having you. For anyone who hasn't already, go check out Dr. Benavidez's website, as well as the Tuba Euphonium page on Facebook and Instagram, and give them a like. But thank you so much for joining us and answering all our questions.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a
Thank you
pleasure.
so
I
much.
enjoyed it so much.
Thank you.
And thanks.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Benavidez.
Thank you.